Welcome back to Chant 101. Today I'm going to show you the actual square notes themselves in single note form, which is the foundation of all the other complex note forms which come after it. The most simple note form in Gregorian square notation is exactly that, a single square note. This is called, in Latin, the punctum, which means dot, but it's actually a square. Now, without getting into the subject of rhythm, suffice it to say here that in contemporary music, a note form is divisible. A whole note can be subdivided into a half note, into a quarter, into an eighth, into a 16th, a 32nd, and so on. But in Gregorian notation, a single note is indivisible. It can never be divided beyond itself. A single note is simply a single beat, a single pulse relative to the syllable that it is sung on. Single notes in Gregorian notation cannot be divided, but only multiplied. We'll talk about rhythm in a series later on. The next note form is called a virga, and you'll notice it's the same square note, but now with a stem added to it, which is what virga means, rod, staff, or stem. Well, what's the difference between the virga and the punctum? Without getting into complex nuances, suffice it to say that there really is no difference between a virga and a punctum, other than that the virga is usually used to indicate when the note is higher than the note which precedes it or higher than the note which follows it. The next note we have is the diamond-shaped punctum. Well, why diamond? First, because these diamond notes are only found in a descending melodic line on a single syllable, never divided over different syllables, only on a single syllable and always in a melodic descent. The second reason is in the material realm. Back when square notation was being developed around the 11th century, they were made square because of the square-nibbed quill pens that they were using. They would form a square by taking that square nib and making a little scribe, making squares. When they came to a descending melodic line as they're making their square notes, they simply rotate that quill pen 45 degrees, and now you have diamonds. So there's the first two reasons. One, because they are only found in a melodic descent, and two, because of the square-nibbed pen rotated 45 degrees. But the third question is, what about the rhythm of these diamond notes? Is there anything different there? Well, that's debatable, and that'll be covered later on. But for beginning purposes, it's best to simply regard the diamond notes as ordinary notes, not to sing them faster, not to sing them slower, unless there are signs indicating for them to be slower. The next note we have is a very interesting note called the Quilisma, and it looks like this, a jagged note. But this note is never found by itself. It's always in the middle of an ascending line. But how is this note to be sung? Well, there are a few different theories about that. One theory, based on ancient manuscripts from the 9th to the 14th century, is that this quilisma, this jagged note, is sung with a kind of trill of the voice. And this is supported by the writings of these manuscripts. But as Don Maccaro points out in his book, The Gregorian Musical Rhythm, it is perhaps a portamento of the voice, a slide from the lower note to the upper note. And Maccaro believes that this is the more likely option based on the manuscripts. But the third theory is the most common and probably the most prudent choice as to how to sing this note. It has a retroactive effect. In other words, the jagged quilisma note indicates that the note immediately preceding it is to be lengthened, perhaps even doubled. And this is supported by all of the ancient manuscripts. The jagged quilisma note itself is sung lightly, and then the note which immediately follows the quilisma is very often also lengthened. But the important thing to notice here is the distinction and difference between the lengthened note which precedes the quilisma and the lengthened note which follows the quilisma. The note before the quilisma is always lengthened, and the character of this lengthened note is full of energy. Imagine a ball being submerged underwater and held there. It's held still, but it's also full of energy. And as soon as you let that ball go, it quickly rises to the surface. Once it reaches the surface, it also again comes to a still. But the still above the water and the still below the water are very different. One is full of energy, one is full of rest. And this is analogous to the quilisma. The note before is held full of energy, the Quilisma itself is sung lightly, and the note which follows the Quilisma, if it is lengthened, is full of rest. If the note which follows is lengthened, it will have a sign indicating that lengthening, and we'll cover those signs later on. Now, if you've been looking at chant notation and you've been paying attention, you might be wondering, what is that curious little half note at the end of each staff? Well, that's a good observation because indeed, at the end of each staff, there is a little square note that has been cut in half. What does this mean? It's a Q note. It tells us what the very next note will be on the next staff line. And this little half note is called the Custos. It's a Q note. To learn about the flatted T and other interesting symbols and signs, check out our next video up here. And don't forget to click the like and subscribe buttons, comment down below, and share this with others. To help support the continuation of this program, please consider joining us on Patreon at patreon.com/Gregorian Chant Academy.